Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Winback, and on today's episode of RPG Radio, I'm going to show you a little bit about how to theory craft your own builds in Grim Dawn. There are a couple rules that I think will make or break any build that you start and intend to finish in Grim Dawn, and I'm going to share those with you today. So, get ready. I've got 3 different builds I'm going to show you that I'm working on at the moment, and tell you how I decide to work with them. On top of talking about each of these 3 characters, I've got a list of 6 different tips for you and some honorable mentions that'll go into making any build that you want fun and at least ultimately playable. And when I say ultimately playable, I mean you can play it in Ultimate. I hope that was implied by what I was saying, but I can understand some words being funny and stuff like that, so let's get started. Now, Number 1, the most important thing for you to know as a player and a character builder, not only in Grim Dawn, but in really any video game that you play, is to make sure that you're playing something that you enjoy. And I know what you're thinking, that probably seems like a really stupid first tip, but I promise you, it will go very, very far in any build that you decide to make in this game and anything that you decide to do in video games as a whole. Right now, there are a lot of games out there that are dominated by this mindset that you need to be playing the most optimal, efficient way possible or you're not playing the game. And I don't know if I need to tell anybody watching this video, but that's stupid. Okay, now that I've gotten that off my chest, it's not always stupid. Obviously, if you're trying to be competitive, if you're trying to go to the absolute tip top of achievement, and you have some sort of leaderboard or timer or rank that you want to get to prove to all the other EP measuring people that yours is the biggest, then I go for efficiency. But for the 99% of the rest of the time, just enjoy yourself. You are playing a game after all, and in and of itself, that is supposed to be fun. At least I would hope it is, but you know, you can never tell with some people. So, how does this relate to Grim Dawn specifically? Well, I can tell you the build on your screen right now is a shaman, and shaman is without a doubt my favorite class in the entire game because it makes very frequent use of 2-handed weapons. Lightning is incredibly fun as a damage form, and the skills that the shaman has give you a lot of freedom to kind of be the melee character that you really want to be, or if you just kind of want to sit back and be the ranged caster that some people enjoy, you've got that ability too. Either way, the shaman is my favorite, so I play it more often than any other build that I want to just sit down and play to maximum capacity. The other thing that you might notice about the build on screen right now is that it is also using the Arcanist. The Arcanist is classically my least favorite build in the entire game, or my least favorite class, sorry. That's because a lot of what it does is all about squishy, kind of lame playstyle, if I'm being honest. And maybe that's not true for you. Maybe you love what the Arcanist can do, but I personally don't. So what I did was took my least favorite class, coupled it with my favorite class, and started building something that can play the type of game that I want to play. These 2 classes combine to form the Druid. And druids, ultimately in every game I've ever played before, are elemental spiritual guides. Always out there just living life in the storm, being the great fury of nature. And maybe that sounds cheesy to some people, but calling down the lightning, riding the thunder, that's backwards. No, riding the lightning is like code for doing meth or something. I don't know. Google it. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that anything can be fun if you want it to be fun, but make sure that you are keeping an eye out for things that you don't enjoy. So this is kind of a side tip for point number 1, but if you're playing something that you're not having fun with, you're only going to lose interest and you're probably going to end up either deleting that character entirely or throwing it on the shelf for so long that you forgot what you were even doing with it. And that brings me quite fluidly into point number 2. In Grim Dawn specifically, and a lot of action RPGs of the isometric variety, you're going to want to make sure that you don't get super attached to your build. Now, I don't mean to say this to scare anybody. I'm not trying to put a depressive state in your mind when you're playing the game, but the game does shift dramatically as you increase the difficulty. So Elite is going to be much more challenging than your normal playthroughs, and Ultimate is going to be infinitely more challenging than that. So what I am saying here is in normal, from levels 1 to 50, and even onward, just in normal in general, experiment, have fun, do what you want to do, but remember that you're going to have to finer tune your build, and you're going to have to make some more creative decisions as the game progresses, because having points in everything all the time, even just a little bit, is going to pull things from your kit that you don't want to lose. So maybe you're losing damage, maybe you're losing some sort of survivability, losing resistances, there's some sort of utility that you need. Something is going to suffer if you spread yourself too thin. So when you're making your build, don't get attached to having everything at your disposal all the time, because you're going to need to focus as the time comes. And just like that, we're actually going to shift over to my next build so you guys can get a look firsthand at what I mean. This build is my Trickster. This build is a Shaman and a Nightblade, and as you can tell, it has got a couple pets. It's got the Unknown Soldier Devotion, two things that were pretty fun for me, honestly. In theme, I like the way that they looked. I like a lot of this build visually. I got the gear to look exactly the way that I want it. It's super edgy. It's got all sorts of tween vibes that I remember from my nostalgic days back in middle school. It's just cool, and it feels cool to look at. But it suffers horrendously from points that are not in the right places. The good news for me when it comes to this Trickster build is that the set, the Blind Assassin set, really helps fill in the gaps that all of my stuff made, but that's only for Elite. All of these builds are being played in Elite. None of them are in Ultimate, none of them are leveled up that far just yet, so Elite is as far as I can take them. And because of that, the gear that I'm working with in this build right now is going to fall off when it comes to Elite. So what I need to start doing is making more decisions about what abilities I'm keeping, what passives I'm going to be putting extra points into. Do I want to keep my Blade Spirit? Do I want to keep the devotions that I've got right now? All of this stuff comes into play, especially hard when you're going from Elite into Ultimate, because there are a lot more sacrifices you have to make, because you are much easier to kill in that game mode. Now, that being said, it can be very easy to trick yourself into falling off of a difficulty cliff in this game. Now, like I said, this set is probably going to fall off pretty hard once we make it into Ultimate. So, if you find yourself getting absolutely stomped by enemies in the game, it may be time to take a standstill and look at what your build is doing, look at your resistances, look at the damage that you're doing, look at how your gear is affecting your abilities, look at where the skill points are in your build, because you'll see right now, this is only an Elite monster, and even though it's a unique monster, it's still taking an incredibly long time for me to kill with all of the damage that we're putting on it. From our pets, from our devotions, from just straight up attacking it with Savagery and Shadow Strike off cooldown. It's very time consuming. And if I had put a bit more effort into focusing this build, that monster would have taken infinitely less time to do away with. But that's the trick. Ultimately, when you're in that kind of fight, if something feels like it's going too long when it should ultimately be taking a lot less time, you'll start to understand where that window is and when you need to start thinking about changes in your gear, changes in your build, changes in your skills, all sorts of stuff like that. Eventually it will come easy to you, but just remember, when things start living longer than the damage that you're dealing, even if you're not dying, you might want to focus on shifting things, changing your build path, or deciding to focus on something else than what you're currently working with. Now, tip number 3 is going to scale off of all the information that you've gotten so far, because I hope you were paying attention. The third most important thing about making a build in Grim Dawn is finding an anchor. And when I say anchor, I mean something to focus what you are trying to create with what you've picked up. Now, that might sound general, that might sound wishy-washy, that might sound like a non-answer to some people, so let me make it more clear. When I'm making a build, I am basing it around one of a couple different things. I may have a class that has a specific skill that I really want to lean very, very hard into. Maybe there is a piece of gear that I think would work very well with a couple other abilities in this kit or the other kit. Maybe there is some sort of lore reason that I want to make a character who fits in the universe, you know, has their own playstyle to mimic what it would really be like if this character existed in the story of Grim Dawn. There are tons of reasons to find a foundation to build something in this game. You just need to make sure that you stick to it. The easiest way I've been able to do this so far is to find a couple signature abilities using the 2 classes that make up our character. Now, the reason that you want to go for only a couple is because you'll need to focus very, very hard on them as the game progresses. That is something that we're going to talk a little bit more in the next point, talk a little bit more about in the next point. But for now, just remember, it's very important to find the center for your build. And when I'm doing that, I'll find 2 or 3 abilities that make the most sense or are the most fun for me, and then I will choose the gear that I'm using for the build, or I will choose the other abilities in the build to work around those skills. As a concrete example, I can tell you in my lore playthrough right now, I have a sentinel that I'm playing that is completely acid damage focused. And on top of that, it uses a lot of eyeball-centered abilities. Those come from both gear. Actually, they come from gear, devotions, and skills. I'm using an occultist for Driga's Evil Eye. I'm using the Guardian's Gaze devotion. And I have a set piece that spawns little kamikaze eyeballs all around the character. So it's got a theme, and it's got a damage type, and it's got abilities that really mesh together to make everything a cohesive signature for that build. If you haven't checked out the lore series, it's fun, I promise, even though you might be missing some of the action on the build videos, still worth it. Anyway, detour completed. I'm just trying to say, give yourself something to focus on when you are free-form theory crafting a build, because it is going to make your build much more effective as you play it and as you go deeper into the game. Which leads us to point number 4. Commit to the abilities that you decide on. This is number 4 for a reason. It actually requires that you get up in difficulty, that your build is something that you enjoy, that you're going to stick with. But committing to the abilities that you've got means that you're focusing on funneling points into them, getting gear that works with them, either providing more points or providing them some sort of functional change. focus those abilities to do more as the game goes on, whether that is utility of some kind, defense, offense. Damage is important, living is important, but you need to be able to do it in huge amounts once you get into Ultimate. The build you're seeing right now is my Commando, and I actually use this in the Getting Started series to get a lot of people some information and guided through the early stages of the game. But now it's on Elite, going into Ultimate rather soon, and I did have to make a lot of turns and a lot of decisions when it comes to this build on what to focus on, because the way that it was working prior to this point wasn't enough to keep me alive. So once I figured out where the build was failing, I decided to shift focus into other areas, which is a lot easier because of the previous point. But now that we're here, I've decided to dump a lot of points into Blackwater Cocktail, a lot of points into Granado, and a lot of points into Hellfire Mine, with a fair few amount of points into Blitz as well. Those are my 4 main abilities, and those are getting most of the points as we level up, because those are where the damage is, those are where the utility that I need is, those are how I'm going to clear mobs, farm gear, and continue to progress. So if I only had 5 or 6 points in each of those abilities, with 5 or 6 points into things like my passives, or Overguard, or any other number of things going on with this build, I would be doing much less damage, and I would probably be in a much greater risk of dying than I would actually plowing my way through the bandit cages right now. It's ultimately a very simple tip, and it doesn't require much more explanation beyond that, but I notice a lot of people really failing to understand that you have to focus your build, and it's just gonna keep rearing its ugly head throughout this video. There's a little bit of a theme, but you need to make sure that you have enough points in what your build is doing so that it can clear enemies and that you can continue to live and clear more enemies to farm more gear, to clear more enemies, to farm more gear infinitely, going forever and ever, because that's why we play video games. Now, tips number 5 and 6 are going to be a lot more important later on in the game, and ultimately they're more about preference. You can ignore this part if you're really feeling like it, but I think they're worth mentioning because a lot of people do get stuck on this type of thing. So as far as number 5 goes, remember that you want to decide the type of damage that you are doing. And you can do that early on, but it is much more difficult than doing it in Elite or Ultimate, because in Normal, your gear and all the stuff that you can find all over the place is going to be literally all over the place. Finding damage types that fit your build, that make sense with what you're doing, finding gear that gives you the stats that you need, it is sheer dumb luck. And none of that gear is going to be high enough level to make a huge impact when it comes to the end game, when it comes to getting highest level in Grim Dawn. So, levels 1 to 50 damage type makes less of an impact because your abilities are going to be doing most of your damage, but in terms of Elite and onward, focusing on a specific damage type, specifically the damage type of the skills that you're, deciding are your damage skills, is pretty important. You want to get gear that couples with that. You want to get gear that supports those damage types, or at least changes the functionality of your ability to maybe a different damage type that you needed to convert to. Grim Dawn has a lot of damage conversion in it. There's lots of items that will switch the type of damage that you're doing if you want to go in another direction. So remember that. It is, again, not as important early on, but once you get later stages in the game, it will make a world of difference. And then finally, tip number 6, probably the shortest, but still requiring some explanation. Make sure that you're farming reputation. And that means with Devil's Crossing, that means with the Coven, that means with the resistance, farm reputation with everybody in the world of Grim Dawn. Those quartermasters, or sorry, the shops, the reputation shops, for people who don't know what a quartermaster is, give you augment that will increase your resistances. They give you some gear. Specifically, some of those shops can give you gear that is incredibly potent for filling out gaps in your build. Those shops are so full of endgame material that ignoring them is an incredibly bad idea. And if you have a fully equipped late game build, it is probably because you took a couple things from those shops. Now, the way that you do that obviously is spread out between all 3 difficulties, so you're always farming reputation. You just have to make sure that you're being proactive and you're focusing on the type of reputation that you need first once you get into Ultimate. Because if you haven't farmed up a faction fully before that point, you may be lacking a specific augment or item or recipe from one of those factions. So, that being said, they also provide writs and they provide mandates for what I'm going to consider an honorable mention of a tip, which is the writs and mandates provide increased reputation gain for other characters. So you'll find a reputation-filled character by a mandate, or because mandate's the only thing that you can transfer to other characters. Get that reputation faster. The reason I'm saying build more characters, though, is because sometimes you just get bored. Sometimes you need a change of scenery, you need a change of pace with a new character or a new build, and maybe that character plays differently. You shuffle it enough that you find more gear, and maybe that character is finding gear that your previous character wasn't. Now you can start making a repository of gear to distribute among all of your characters in the shared stash. This is something that I do with almost every build that I make. I have tons and tons of purple and blue items in a box between all of my characters, and I will go through and check off whether or not I want to use any of those for a new build that I'm starting. But that was it. That was all the tips that I have for theory crafting. I hope this build video helps, and let me know in the comments down below if you made it this far. Thanks so much for hanging out, everybody. I will see you all next time.